Today is May 1st, which means it's time to wrap up all of the books I read in April, and I feel like April was a pretty solid reading month. I've read 4 books in April, one of which I'm only going to mention briefly here because my full thoughts will be coming in a vlog that should be going up shortly after this wrap-up goes up, so we'll start there. And as a little teaser for that video, I did really enjoy this book. So this was The Mysterious Case of the Alperton Angels by Janice Hallett. I had a lot of fun with this. This is a mixed media mystery involving a cult and a child who is at the center of a mass suicide. The child survived and people are now hunting him down. This is following 2 journalists, one of whom is our main character. Her name is escaping me at the moment, but it's her and Oliver. What is her name? Amanda. So Amanda Bailey is trying to hunt down this child and get an interview with them for a new book, but her rival, Oliver, is also trying to hunt down the child, who is now a teenager, is now like 18 years old, and both of them kind of get entangled in this investigation into the cult, and things just get more and more out of hand as the investigation goes on. I loved this. It had some really interesting themes around, like, gullibility and our ability to be tricked by misinformation, and also there was some questions of justice and like what that looks like. So I just thoroughly enjoyed this. We will be getting much more in-depth thoughts in the video that's coming in the next few days, hopefully. But yeah, overall had a really great time with this, and I'm very excited for her next book. Then moving backwards in time, the first thing I read in April was actually the Amityville Horror. I listened to this one on audio at work, and honestly it was pretty forgettable. I don't remember that much about it at this point. This is ostensibly a non-fiction story of a haunting that was experienced by a family who moved into a house and then fled from that same house like less than a month later, or about a month later. And it was interesting. Like, it was about just the weird things that happened to them, and there were a few moments where I felt like the author did a pretty clever thing. Is it Jay Anson, I think, did a clever thing where he would kind of lay some breadcrumbs of information, and then you'd get something that would like recontextualize all of that later, and I thought that was pretty clever. There were a few moments of that where just like everything kind of clicked into place and you got what was going on, but overall I found it just kind of forgettable and boring. I didn't like the way it was written, I think was part of the problem. It was very dry and clinical feeling, and so a lot of what was described just didn't come across as like scary. It was just like, this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and it just felt very like clinical in its descriptions, which also made it a little bit uncomfortable because there were a couple of times that were the author was talking about like the sex life of the couple that was living in this house, and it just was kind of icky feeling. So it was like fine. I think I gave it 3 stars when I first read it. I think now I'd probably give it 2 just because I don't remember that much of it or any of the like specific details, but it was at least interesting to read that since it's you know, a kind of a classic book and is the source of at least one movie I know of. So, you know, I'm glad I took the time to read it. It was a way to pass the time for a little bit, I guess. Then I ended up reading a book for class that I absolutely loved. So, opposite end of the spectrum, this was fantastic. This was Zomfam by Kamala Mackerel. They are an artist and a community builder and obviously a poet and a writer. And they came to campus actually and did a couple of talks. I only got to go to one of them, which it was just fantastic. They're really interesting, and they talked a lot about their interest in creating like hybrid spaces that break down categorizations of knowledge, which I thought was interesting. With this particular collection, it was originally a stage performance, and it's about their life and their experience of coming out as trans as an adult, but also just like their familial relationships leading up to that and the ways that they experienced like gender expectations as a child. And the whole thing is just brilliant. I think there's some really interesting formatting going on. There's a lot of discussion in here of like craft, because they're also involved in like craft work. There's some interesting stuff with like colonialism and the way that that impacts language and languages that we use. So I really enjoyed this. I think it's really fantastic, and if you get a chance to read this one, you should absolutely give it a try. And then the very last thing I read was Phantom Tales of the Night Volume 2 by Matsuri. This one I read on a whim because I was looking for something quick and easy in this like awkward amount of time I had before class. Turned out that it was really useful for the thing I was currently working on, so that was fantastic. But I really enjoyed the way that this continued on the story. This series seems to be told in like a series of like shorter vignettes, but then there's frequently like little ties between them that get revealed later in the volume. So I really enjoyed all of the stories in here. There were a couple that really stood out to me. There's one called Snow Lass and Mountain Ogre that I thought was really cool. It was about like love and relationships. There's one called The Cherry Tree That Gave Birth. It's very much about the purpose of life and like what is the purpose of living and what are we supposed to do with the time that we have. And that gave us a lot more information about one of the side characters, Butterfly, and I really enjoyed learning that about them. And then also the last story in here gives us some really interesting background on a character introduced in Volume 1 who seems to be a sort of like foe or rival of the innkeeper. And I'm so interested to see where that storyline is going to go and how things are going to play out for that character. I think he's had a really interesting life up to this point, quite dark as well, and I'm just curious to see like what kind of person he's going to be as the series progresses. So thoroughly enjoyed my time with Volume 2. So this was a pretty quick and easy wrap up because I didn't read a whole lot, but I feel like I had a pretty good sense of how I felt about everything, and this is all that I read in April, plus that audiobook that I kind of don't care about. But yeah, I feel like this was pretty solid, and I'm really looking forward to May. I am finishing up my grad school stuff, so I'm gonna have a lot more reading time, and I'm just excited to dive in. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite thing you read in April was. I would love to know. And if you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.